there's usually some characteristics you're going to see on gutters that are aging, some evidence of staining. Might see some water dripping in the corners or coming out of the downspouts, etc. Gutters are something where, they do need maintenance.
I've got a bone to pick with gutters. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, gutters. In a lot of cases, I think people think they're incredibly simple. They can be. At the end of the day, that's what the experience of getting gutters and having them on your home is all about. But for sure, there's a lot of bones to pick. How they perform, color selection, locations to convey water out and away from homes. Sometimes there's a lot of restrictions to achieving that, and you've got to be able to just optimize as best you can. I think about gutters and the bone to pick. In our case, we had been subcontracting them for a few years, and we continued to see not quite that level of great outcome that we wanted, right, to exceed customer expectations. So the investments we've made in new equipment, multiple sizes, and bringing a crew in to help address next level of gutters is definitely starting to pay off. So.
Yeah, I would say so. We can do a variety of different gutters as well now that we have all of our own equipment. What would you say to a customer that needs to know if they need 5 or 6 inch gutters?
That's a great question. I think a lot of times we just look at some of the basics in conveyance of water. Obviously, roof size comes into account, and the length of the home, the geometry of the home. A lot of times an interest in a 6 inch gutter may just be to over-spec, make absolutely sure it can handle water. Longer runs, bigger facilities obviously need to convey more water. But in a lot of cases, it's not needed. Obviously, we can do them. We do them all the time. But, if it's not needed, that wouldn't necessarily be something we'd want to push. So sometimes, we'll look, through some of those things with homeowners. Sometimes less is more. It's like, look, we can still move water for you, right? But if you want to just save a few bucks, we don't necessarily need to put a 6 inch here, and it'll give you a little more curb appeal, in some cases versus, the gutter standing out instead of all the other features of the home.
What would you say to a homeowner that is wondering how their gutter is working? How would they check that for themselves?
Yeah, great questions. Sometimes if you don't see them when they're working, you wouldn't know. Like a customer, let's say, for instance, works nights and they're never really home and awake in the day, right? There's usually some characteristics you're going to see on gutters that are aging, some evidence of staining. Might see some water dripping in the corners or coming out of the downspouts, et cetera. Gutters are something where, they do need maintenance, especially if there's no gutter guards, which, we're happy to install to prolong the need for maintenance in many cases. But typically they're clogged. So first thing to be looking for is whether or not you see evidence of them getting clogged or aged. After a while, they will start to tatter. Do they look like they're hanging evenly? If you look closely on a roof, right, we'll see the gutter in proximity to the roof actually has a draft angle, right? And if that draft angle doesn't look consistent, then highly likely that the water's not going to be properly flowing through them as well. Older homes, sometimes we have to compensate for that a little, but relatively speaking, there's a lot of telltale indicators. So it's important, coming out of our 25-point inspections to help homeowners see some of the evidence there, point some of that out, maybe encourage some maintenance steps. If you're a little more handy and capable, twice a year at a minimum, need to get them cleaned out. All right, once in the spring and once in the fall when leaves come down. That's usually when they get clogged, and you'll see more evidence than other times of the year. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
What do gutter guards play as a role in that?
Yeah, great question. There's so many different types of gutter guards and systems with gutter guards on the market. The whole objective is to keep debris free and clear from getting into the gutter, right? So many different styles to achieve with that. A lot of trade-offs, a lot of manufacturers in the industry continuing to push the edge to find ways to optimize water flow without debris interrupting, the ability for that to happen. This winter, it's been interesting. A lot of snow load. We got a really heavy wet snow at Thanksgiving. that particular week. And then coming off of that, it's been a Michigan winter. So a lot of snow load on gutters right now. And, sometimes you'll see where a gutter guard may actually present some challenges, which may not necessarily mean that things are bad. It's just, it's waiting to thaw out before more water can flow. So snow will build up on a gutter guard depending on the design. So
if someone's looking to check that out for themselves, when would you recommend that they do that after a big snow?
Yeah, after a big snow, I think in addition to spring and fall, even if you're just pulling into your garage and, look up, what do you see when you're out getting the mail? That'd be another great opportunity. Or, of course, when you're taking your dog for a walk or letting them out back, look up and see if you see anything unusual. And then if there's doubts, give us a call, give your contractor a call, and we can always help you get a second opinion. It's always best to just double check if there's any doubts.